If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, campers, scouts, hikers, etc., what is the scariest thing that has ever happened to you in the middle of nowhere? Camping in the back country in Quebec, pretty much all alone for what we thought. We heard shuffling outside of the tent one night but wrote it off as a raccoon or possum. Woke up in the morning with scattered cigarette butts all around the front of our tent as if someone stood there all night keeping an eye on us. Nothing happened after that except some spectacular storms and bear sightings. Wildland firefighter here. I spend a lot of time in the woods. Last summer I was up in the Lawson NF in Northern California and we had an off day due to some weather, so we decided to drive to a lake and hang out there for the day. I started wandering around and found this really cool tree that had about a 45-degree lean over this little gully, so I climbed up to the top. I was hanging out taking in the view, and all of a sudden, in the clump of trees next to me, I hear this shuffle thump going down the tree from the top to the bottom, and hear earth-shattering footsteps clunking away from the trees. Unfortunately, the trees were too thick for me to see the bear even though it was 10 feet away from me, but I hustled out of there pretty quick. Boundary waters in MN. Areas of lakes untouched by modern actions, you can drink right out of them. You use old beaver trapper trails to go lake to lake, portaging your gear. I was walking a trail full gear, that means my camping supplies bag on my back, food bag on my front, 15 feet canoe on my shoulders. I could see maybe 20 to 30 feet ahead. I stopped dead in my tracks when I was looking at two very big, large clawed feet. The size of those feet. That bear had to be taller than me. I'm in freak out mode, with a plan in my head to push the canoe forward off my shoulders, drop to my knees and let it fall on me, brace myself inside of it with my legs while getting this stupid bag of food off my chest. I slowly raised the nose of the canoe, and that bear wasn't even up to my hip really. The bit of shock on how small it was, and how big their feet are, maybe did me well as I didn't move. It sniffed the air for a second, then turned and went off the trail. I was struck by two things. First off, how damn muscular a wild bear is. Zoo bears are fat asses. This thing looked ripped even under all the hair. I was also amazed that even though I was hyper-focused on this little power ball, as soon as he left the trail I couldn't see him. I could hear him a little, but holy hell, they are invisible in even a little brush. That fact unnerved me the rest of the trip as I kept waiting for a ninja bear to jump out and get me. I went hiking in the mountains with some friends in college. I should preface this story with the fact that I am not a camping diva. Whatever outdoor camping skills I should have had before going on this trip, I definitely didn't have them. We hiked up some mountain and camped in a secluded spot. I got up in the middle of the night to pee, didn't take a flashlight for some dumbass reason, walked far enough away from the tent so my crush couldn't hear me pee, took my pants off, squatted down and pissed. A couple seconds later I hear, "Hey, did you guys hear that?" Apparently I had stumbled onto another campsite and was pissing less than a foot from their tent. Scared the shit out of me, so I fell over onto their tent. I pissed all over my pants, pissed on their tent. There was confusion and shock in their tent, and I was so embarrassed that I ran away back to my campsite. Got lost in the dark. Finally found my way back. A few years ago I was elk hunting in what I thought was the middle of nowhere. I had hiked in the day before, and slept in the woods because I had hiked in so far. The next morning around 9 a.m. I saw some smoke coming from behind a hill. I went to check it out, and as I was walking I kept hearing gunshots coming from the same area. These weren't "let's take the boy out and teach him to shoot" a rifle shots, it sounded like a war going on. I checked my map again and confirmed I was in fact out in the middle of nowhere. As I got closer I could hear a large group of guys yelling and carrying on like a bunch of redneck frat boys. I ended up about 60 yards away from them, hidden behind a tree on top of a hill. There was 14 guys, all bald, all with tattoos, and all of them had some kind of assault rifle with them. They were burning all kinds of garbage and really trashing the area. Once I realized what was going on I backed out slowly and made some distance. I figured a group of skinheads didn't want me crashing their party. I was hiking with some friends in the Cascades, on a fairly remote trail that was owned and maintained by a little backwoods community in the mountains. It was a gorgeous spring day, we made good time, were in high spirits. And then, several hours into the woods, we found a balloon, a shiny helium happy birthday balloon, tied to a log in the path. It was almost entirely deflated, but not quite. This was a little weird, but obviously just someone's idea of a joke. We kept going and a few hours later found another one, "It's Your Day," also tied in the center of the path, a lot more deflated. It was getting dark at this point, and even though it was obviously just a prank we were a bit creeped out, so we headed back. Naturally got a little lost and wound up on some guy's property. We were going to go ask for directions, but then we noticed that he had a scarecrow strung up by the neck in his front yard. The door opened and a guy straight out of Deliverance stepped out onto the dirt, so we booked it back up the trail and eventually made our way back out. Pretty sure we narrowly avoided some kind of ritual murder up there. My friend and I were driving back from a gig in Somerset, along a completely dead country road. It was about 1 a.m., I guess, and a beautifully clear night. We decided to pull over in a lay-by to take a break and look at a starry night sky that we wouldn't usually see in the city. We'd only been out of the car, standing on the pavement in the lay-by, for a few moments when we heard 3 distinct raps on the car. We both turned and looked at each other, about to say, "Was that you?" But we realized it hadn't been the other. And then it happened again. Another 3 distinct raps. That was enough for us. There was nothing around for a few hundred yards. It wasn't the familiar sound of a car cooling. These were taps like someone knocking on the bloody car. We got the duck out of Dodge. My housemate was so freaked out she even checked in the back seat before she got in case someone had been sneaking around and was planning to cut our throats. And then we floored it for about 15 miles, too frightened to stop. I don't know what the hell it was, but we both thought we were about to become the root of an urban legend. Christmas Eve, staying at a friend's house in the woods. Drunk dad decides I should be home with my family and not around him. We smoked a lot of weed while we thought he was passed out. It is snowing like crazy, about 6 inches per hour. I could have walked the long way around on the half-mile driveway and the 2-mile road, but no, I had a brain full of THC and wanted to go the short way, 1 mile total on a rough trail through the woods. The snow is about 2 feet deep and it is dark. I get about halfway home and have to stop every 100 feet or so to make sure I am on track. I realize that something is tracking me about 15 feet on my left, uphill side. I try to keep cool, but the stress of the trip in the deepening snow and the aforementioned devil's lettuce I had consumed started up a bit of panic. When I stop walking, so does the whatever the hell it is. Run, nope. Snow is too deep and you learn early on that a panic run in the woods is a fool's folly. So I decide to head downhill and find the road below, to my right. I get about 200 yards and fall off the ledge of the road cut. The snow is plenty deep and I make it about halfway down in a very respectable face plant. I laugh a bit about it all and hear breathing behind me. Hair on my neck stands up and I roll the rest of the way to the semi-plowed road and run like hell. I never looked behind me once. I guess I did not want to know what it was. Never walked that trail in the dark again. During the summers I would spend a month or so visiting family in Michigan. Some of my cousins my age would go to a camp in the up called Hiawatha. The cabins we got assigned for the week had about 6 campers and 2 counselors and were spaced far apart from each other deep in the woods away from in common area. There were stories about a father and son that were hunting near the campgrounds during the off-season. The story went that the father thought he saw a big buck and took a shot at it only to get to the deer and find out he shot his son in the neck. Being so deep in the woods and such a fatal shot, he shot his son in the head to stop the pain. The game and wildlife agents that found them said the father suffered an apparent gunshot wound through the roof of his mouth or of his head in what looked like a murder/suicide. The counselors always felt it necessary to tell this story to the younger/new campers. Now, I don't know if hearing the story and the atmosphere of cabins being so far from the common areas and deep in the woods caused me to see things. But a friend I was walking from the cabins to the mess hall with early one morning, before the breakfast bell, we saw what looked like a father and son dressed like they were hunting carrying shotguns walking towards our cabin. Ours was almost second from being the farthest from anything. We took off so fast sprinting through the trees, and once we hit the open field between the cabins and the mess hall, we saw another group of guys running out behind us. We were shocked to see anyone else before the bell rang and running no less. We asked why they were running too. They looked back from the direction they came, turned back to us and said, "We saw a hunter pointing a shotgun at us." I was camping with some high school friends back in the 80s. We were about 6 miles down a newly built dirt logging road in some deep and previously unexplored forest. We built a campfire and some of us were drinking pretty heavily, so one of the guys got out a tape recorder to embarrass us with later. Sometime after midnight our revelry was interrupted by the loudest, scariest bass-toned roar we'd ever heard. None of us have ever heard anything like it to this day. It was louder and deeper than any black bear roar, and there were almost no bears around here then anyhow. Only our teenage bravado and the advanced state of drunkenness of some of us kept us from leaving in fright. But we did put out our campfire and stay in our cars that night. The kicker is, this roar was caught on the tape. You could tell from the echo it was a sound clearly from a distance, but was still so loud it caused the recording to distort. Truly frightening. Sadly, the tape was lost long ago. Not too long after that we started hearing stories of people encountering Bigfoot on the local section of the Appalachian Trail. I have no idea if that was Bigfoot we heard, and I'm very skeptical about anything like that, but I'm sure it was no bear we heard. When I was 13, I went to a summer camp in northern Scotland. When we were there I absolutely loved it, it was amazing. On the 14th night I was there, however I started to notice that something kept moving past the window during the night. The few previous nights I had noticed it but just kinda brushed it off as it was always around 2 a.m. and I was tired. This night was different. I was sitting on my phone for about 4 hours just watching YouTube when I saw the thing move past the window again. Initially, like always I just brushed it off and left it when I realized that the shape moving past the window had actually stopped in the window as if it had seen me or something. I had no idea what to even rationalize it with, I was just frozen with fear. My best friend at the time, Logan, was in the bunk underneath me and my older brother, John, in the bunk across from, so I woke them and told them the story of this weird figure. Halfway through telling it I looked at the window again and could distinctly see two eyes staring at Logan. I kept my cool and said quietly to Logan and John, "Don't look now, but that thing I'm telling you about is now staring at you." Logan instantly jumped and turned to look at the window when we saw it had moved closer to the window. We all screamed and jumped back into bed when we saw John get up to try and go outside and see what this thing was. Logan was adamant that this thing was some sort of unholy creature sent by the devil. He was a die-hard Christian, and I just didn't want to go outside. After the figure not moving for another 15 minutes, we all decided just to go outside and confront this thing. We slowly edged our way out the door and around the side of the building where the window was when we started to hear what sounded like human breathing. Me and Logan looked for a large stone and stick respectively so we could protect ourselves. All three of us jumped round the corner at the same time to confront this creature when we saw it, on all fours, run away. It left behind a horrible smell and what looked like a large piece of skin. The woods have eyes. I was about 10 years old. I went to a summer camp in Oregon named Camp Howard. This was summer 1994. The camp is a Catholic youth camp, but really feels more like every traditional summer camp you might see in movies. Sneaking out in the middle of the night to go skinny dipping, over-the-top campfire horror stories, all manner of activities, it was a blast. This story concerns said late-night skinny dipping. 4 of us boys really hit it off. Nothing erotic, just as a disclaimer here, just that we all had similar thoughts and comfort about being nude around one another. Our cabin was near the old pool, dating back to World War II. It was concrete, old, and mostly still and moving water. They had a proper lake, but none of us felt comfortable walking that far in the dark. They also had a brand new swimming pool, but that was fenced off and had a security buoy that would screech if something disturbed it too much. It was about 2 weeks into my stay. Howard offered longer blocks back then, when my new camp besties decided some midnight skinny dipping was in order. For the purposes of the story, I'm going to name them Sean, John, and Eric. The 4 of us snuck out like ninjas in the night. I was skinny as a rail back then, and quite adept at sneaking, and my eyes have always been exceptional in anything other than total darkness. Meaning no light particles at all. So, I didn't really need a flashlight, though we took one just to be safe. Our plan was to go, strip, swim, then get out and walk the trails just a little in the buff to air dry, then return to our beds unnoticed. We made it to the pool, undetected. We chucked our clothes and began to swim. Eric and John were in the middle of a who can hold their breath the longest contest. It was very shortly afterward that Sean put his hand on my chest, hard. I said, "What? Oh my God. Someone's out there." Sean shivered. "Where?" I asked. Sean pointed and even grabbed my chin to point me in that direction. He was right. Even in the dark, at around say the 6 foot to 6.5 foot height were a pair of eyes and a shadowy shape of a man. The eyes behaved much like a cat's when it reflects light, that animal-like yellow-green in the dark, yet it was at the height of a man. Sean and I whispered to John and Eric to get over to us. They do, and we show them the shadow. John damn near screamed, but just did that sudden squeak and slapped his hands over his mouth. Eric uttered an obscenity, and wondered if it was a counselor on night patrol. We asked, why wouldn't they have said anything then? "Shine a flashlight," yelled, "Hey you kids." Or something. Eric insinuated something fairly dark, that I won't repeat, but the irony of telling Eric that his argument didn't hold water isn't lost on me. Sean asked what we should do. I said, we grab our clothes, and run. We hold hands so nobody gets lost, and we book it. I said I'd take the lead since my night vision is the best. We get close to our cabins, throw our cloths back on, climb back into the cabin and get into bed. They agreed. I counted to 3, and we ran. We grabbed our clothes. I hadn't thought to put our sandals back on, so, Let me tell you, running on that trail hurt for days after. We ran, looking over our shoulder. The figure seemed to be following, but still getting further and further away. We made it to the rally point, got dressed, and climbed into the cabin. We slipped back into our bunks, and no one was the wiser. Every now and again, while walking to campfire, we'd swear we'd catch glimpses of the figure. All summer long, it was this eerie presence. My counselor one night sat the four of us down. He noticed a drastic change in our moods/behaviors. We said we'd tell, but we don't want to get in trouble. He said he wouldn't, on the contingent we fess up. We told him the whole thing. We admitted to sneaking out, the skinny dipping, and the shadow figure. At first, he laughed. He told us that he started going to Howard back in the 70s, and sneaking out to skinny dip was practically tradition among young boys, and we shouldn't do it, but he said it was really a no harm no foul instance. His expression darkened, and he confessed that as far back as 1978, the last year he attended as a youth, he also saw the same figure. He told us that he told his counselor roughly the exact same story. He and a much larger group of boys had snuck out for a skinny dip, when they also saw the figure. My counselor said that his counselor told roughly the exact same story from when he was a camper there. In the end, we've learned that as far back as the 1960s, this phantom has appeared near the upper pool, very late at night. My grandparents used to send me to a week-long Christian summer camp. At the end of the week they'd have a big bonfire. They would pass a microphone around and people would share their testimonies. It was taken pretty seriously. At the end they'd have all the campers throw sticks into the fire to represent their devotion to Jesus. I wasn't Christian/didn't believe in God, but my two friends I went to the camp with did. After everyone threw their sticks they were supposed to go back to their cabin. The bonfire pit was in a clearing in the woods a good distance away from the cabins. Well, my one friend had become emotional, so after throwing her stick she started having a conversation with our cabin counselor instead of heading back with everyone else. They were sitting on one of the benches surrounding the fire. My other friend and I wanted to give her some space to talk, so we decided to hang out near some trees right outside of the light from the fire. While we waited for her we were chatting, minding our own business, when suddenly we realized people were forming a ring around the fire. We then noticed our friend and counselor had left. So it was just us hidden in the darkness of the trees and the people around the fire, which we quickly realized were the camp leaders. Some of them were wearing cloaks, which made my weirdness sensor start to go off. They said a prayer about everyone's devotion and then started chanting/speaking in tongues. In a ring around this huge bonfire. We were so freaked out. We ran as fast as we could through the woods back to our cabin. I swear I thought I was going to get sacrificed if they had seen us there. Had a campfire going and me and 3 other guys decided to leave this other guy and girl, who were going out, by the campfire and explore the woods. Guy in front has a duck-off maglite, the kind the police over in the colonies use. Guy number 2 was filming in night vision for shits and G's. The path through the woods meant we had to walk single file, and night vision didn't want to go last because he was pretty freaked out, so I told him I would. We're walking through the woods, pitch black but for this maglite, which is facing forward. Scaring each other, freaking each other out. There's a murderer in these woods watching us. Guy number 3 says jokingly. Ho ho ho. All of a sudden we hear an almighty log somewhere off to our right being cracked. This wasn't no branch falling off no tree, no badger stepping on a twig. This was a big ass log being thunderclapped in twain. We all paused and looked off into the darkness. Maglite slowly brings the torch round. We see a shape, somewhere off in the dark. Not a tree. Not some small woodland creature. A big ducking lumbering mass. This is the west of England, mind, and we don't get nothing bigger than a deer in our woodlands. Whatever the shape was, it was massive. Needless to say, by this point I was already sprinting back the way we came, laughing maniacally because if I didn't laugh I'd have dropped to the ground, grabbed my knees and blubbered like a little girl with a skinned knee. Night vision notices I'm gone and with a goddammit. He's off after me, the other 2 behind us, screaming and a hollerin'. We got back to the campfire and told the others, but they didn't believe us. We felt pretty safe out in the open. Our campfire was right in the middle of a huge open field, so we stayed put. I popped some ecstasy and had a great night after that. Never been able to explain the shape in the dark. I once stayed in a cabin in Arkansas facing the river. One side of the cabin was almost all window with no blinds or anything, which made me feel really creeped out, especially the first time it got dark and you couldn't see out. The first night we stayed there, this beating started on all sides of the cabin. It was loud and eerily fast-paced, moving from one wall to the next to the roof, etc. A few times the gas-powered fireplace would roar up and then go out, the TV would turn on and just be static, really cliché stuff. We would also hear whispering at night, and because I was too much of a poon to sleep with the lights off after the first night, we left the hall light on and the bedroom door shut and locked, till we started seeing shadows under the door, got the duck out of there. I don't know if the place was poorly built or people were messing with us or what, but the shadows under the door was way too much for me. Camping is fun as hell though, give it a chance. Despite being scared as hell, it's one of my fondest camping memories. I was camping in Sylvania Wilderness area in the up of Michigan. The campsite I was at was on a lake and only accessible by canoe. The first night at that campsite I was sitting at my fire in the dark. I was just thinking about heading to my tent to sleep when I look up and see an orb of light floating in the woods behind my tent. It looked about a foot in diameter of white light and gave off very little light. It moved slowly and steadily through the forest and eventually disappeared behind a tree. I was pretty disturbed by this unexplainable orb of light and decided not to go to my tent for a few more hours. It was an unsettling night. It looked like one of those will-o'-the-wisps from folklore and legends. Around 18 months ago, when my girlfriend and I first got together, we went camping regularly with a couple of friends in a large ancient wood. We would go in, set the tent up in the light, have a barbecue and some beers, then sleep. Well, our friends would. If you know what I mean. JPG. We went several weeks running. Same routine, different friends each time, etc. until one night we decided to leave the tent and return later so we could get some more supplies. We returned to the tent at dusk, but found a stick figure made from twigs at the entrance of the tent. We smoked a bit, had some booze. One of our friends, who reluctantly joined us on this occasion, turned strange. He disappeared into the woods, which we found strange as he was petrified on the way into the woods. We could hear nothing but singing for at least an hour. He eventually returned, and we continued to party until it started to rain heavily, at which point we decided to call it a night. We woke up in the morning and decided to pack the tent down, when it became obvious that the trees surrounding our tent had the same shape as the figure carved into the bark. We pretty much rushed to get out of there, and came across a still burning pit of fire surrounded by felled trees. That was the final straw, so we ran the remaining mile back to my car. Just after finishing our GSCEs, a group of my friends and I went camping. The weather was naff, and on the whole huge campground there was pretty much just us and a group of Irish scouts. So we all ended up hanging out together along with the youngish guys who ran all the activities on the site. Technically any activities had to be booked and paid for in advance, but these guys were bored so they let us do anything that didn't involve expensive equipment for free. On our last night they took us on the, pathetically unscary, ghost walk. It was so wussy that we took over in the end and started telling them creepy stories. When we were all pretty much ready for bed, our group went across the field to our tents, all laughing and joking, until one of the other girls stopped still and said loudly, "What's that in front of our tent?" There was a short, white figure pacing in front of one of the tents, about 30 feet away from us. It was dark, but we could all see it as a solid-looking shape. One of the girls screamed and it stopped pacing and rushed at us. I have never run faster in my life. I lost my shoes halfway across the field and kept going straight onto the tarmac road and down to the activities buildings. We went back with about 20 scouts and some burly guys with big lanterns, but there was nothing to be seen. Who knows, it was probably just mist or something, but it was shit scary at the time. Hasn't put me off camping though. Man up and get your arse in a tent. About 10 years ago my wife and I were on a road trip around Nova Scotia, camping in public and private campgrounds along the way. One night, we were miles away from any real campground, so we asked at a restaurant if there was anywhere we could camp for free for the night. We were told about a public park on a cliff overlooking the ocean near Antigonish. We drove up there and we were the only ones, besides an older couple in a fifth wheel. There was an old lighthouse right there near the parking lot, and we set up our tent on the grass near our car at the base of the lighthouse. Pretty bad idea, as all night long, the light would blink on for about 2 seconds, then off for 3. Over and over. All night long. Around 2 in the morning, we started to hear very strange noises coming from the woods that surrounded the clearing on all sides except for the cliff side. Moaning, humming, crying type noises. Very strange. That, coupled with the on and off blinking of the lighthouse, made for a very unsettling night. The walls of the tent would light up, and we kept expecting to see the silhouette of an old sea captain hovering over our tent. I used to like to go out to my grandparents' property in the middle of nowhere by myself, and just walk out into the woods and find a random spot and make that my camp for the night. My dad had told me that supposedly there had been an old farmstead nearby a very long time ago, but I'm not sure about the validity of that. But one time, I had built myself a half-face brush shelter and slept through the night fairly well. It was early morning as the sun was just coming up and I had pulled the light blanket over my face. It was thin enough that I could just see through it, and as I was starting to wake up, I saw what looked like two men standing outside my shelter, staring down at me. I could not make out faces, but they were wearing those old-time wide brim hats, not cowboy hats but like the kind settlers wore. They didn't do anything but stand there like they were curious. I sort of woke all the way up and pulled the blanket down quick, and there was nobody there. I'm sure it was just a dream, maybe. This wasn't really camping, but I do have an interesting story about. So me and my friends went stargazing to a mountain, not far from my village. The village was so close we could see the lights shining in the distance. The mountain is accessible by road, but it's a dirt road and not very wide. In some places two cars cannot pass next to each other. So we arrived there, and the sun barely lights the sky up. I took the opportunity to turn the car back to face where we came from so it wouldn't be a struggle later on. We sat there and talked about everything whilst we were looking at the stars. It started to get cold, so we went to sit back in the car. The moon is out and is lighting up the road, but not that much. Suddenly I get this feeling something isn't right, like something is about to happen. I asked my friends and they felt the same. Then, I look in the rear view mirror and from the distance I see a shadowy figure speeding towards the car. One of my friend had those military flashlights, so he points it towards it. It didn't look like a human for sure. In a split second I start up the car and race out of there. Now at that time I had an old car, and you shouldn't go faster than 20 to 30 kilometers per hour due to the poor road quality. But I was here doing 50 to 70 kilometers per hour. There was a chance the car might flip, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get away as fast as possible. When we eventually made it home, I see the left tire on the back was flat. I didn't mind, knowing we were safe. I don't know what would have happened if I didn't take the time to turn the car when we arrived on the mountain. When I was 15, the summer camp I was at was meant to be instructor training 1. So, the first training task was to make a makeshift shelter, have it okayed by the instructors, and then spend the night sleeping there alone, while being told that if anything makes us uncomfortable, we were to return to the camp ASAP. So, I went to this particular hill about 10 minutes from the camp that was good place for staying there overnight. There used to be rumors about Satanists going there time to time, and a year before this happened, there was actually a hole dug on the top that actually looked like a grave to a bunch of teenagers, majority of us were, and a bunch of bracelets had been found there, too. But no one ever saw anything suspicious with their own eyes, and there never were anything that would stop us from going there, too, so I was like, who the hell cares? The worst that could happen is that the folks who were supposed to have their meetings there will wake me up and tell me to leave. I was always taught that there is one main rule for sleeping in the forest alone: go to sleep when there is still light, so I did just that. Fell asleep fairly quickly, too. And then it happened. I woke up about 2 hours later, all my senses running at the top speed, my heart beating wildly, everything in me screaming. I haven't seen anyone there, but the whole sense of go 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 made me pack all my belonging in record time, and I ran from the hill as if all the devils were behind me. Well, maybe they were. I have no idea how I managed to rush down the hill to the path down without having a light on, and without hitting any of the trees that grew there. All I know is that I stopped only when I stood in the middle of the summer camp place, and to this day I have no idea what woke me up and sent me running. My GF and I went on a 14-mile backpacking trip to a beautiful and remote mountain lake. We arrived to the site at sunset and rapidly set up our camp. We were exhausted, but everything was good. First night sleeping there, nothing unordinary. The second night, however, Ujbo JHHH, let me tell you guys about the second night. My girl and I had settled in our tent for the night. We had a lantern hanging up inside the tent for light, and we were just chilling and talking. Suddenly we hear distinct bipedal footsteps approach the tent. Whatever, I mean, other people do hike and camp this area, so whatever, it's not too strange, I guess. We were a little weirded out, but we didn't bother looking out at that point just yet. Then it gets freaky and continues walking right up to the tent. This time we're like, okay, WTF, and we pause and go silent, and we're just listening. Short time passes and we forget about it. Now once more we hear footsteps approaching, but this time they're much faster and it sounds like it's running at the tent. I had a rifle, so I grabbed it and got ready. My girl had a knife, and we no shit braced for whoever this was. We did not feel like it was an animal. Nothing happened. It ran at the tent and the sound vanished. We got out because we were done being ducked with and were ready to fight if need be. We look around with flashlights and nothing. No sign of anything or anyone. It was the most raw adrenaline rush I've ever gotten whilst camping / hiking, etc. It still freaks us out to this day when we talk about it. 3 years ago I was hiking in the Smoky Mountains. There's a neat trail that runs along a stream for the better part of 2 miles, so if you overheat you can just wade in the water and cool down. My wife and my sister were also accompanying me on the hike, so the three of us stopped at the little swimming area to cool down. A disheveled and especially scrappy-looking hobo wearing nothing but raggedy tattered shorts walked out from the woods, barefoot, and approached the water. He speared a few small fish in matter of seconds with a broken stick, went back to the rocks, smashed the fish on the rocks full-on Smeagol style and then picked out the raw meat and ate it. He then went into the water waist deep upstream from us, smiled and said nature calls y'all. He tore off his shorts and contorted just like Gollum when he was thinking really hard about the riddle. Oh, you know what he was doing. We left the water as quickly as possible. He put his shorts back on underwater, got out, and went back to picking like a vulture at the exploded fish guts. I was in awe. This man was living the dream. Far be it for me to judge, right? He speared a few more fish, put them in a doggy bag he must have nabbed from the ranger station 2 miles back, threw it over his shoulder, started rambling about bears and cheese or something, and then walked into the woods while laughing like a madman. Last year in late summer 2 friends and myself went camping in BC in a pretty populated campsite. It was supposed to be a super chill evening. We had cooked some food and were sharing a bottle of wine and stayed up late chatting. The time was about 1 a.m. We were probably the only people awake at the site as everything was silent around us. All of a sudden we hear this thumping running sound towards us, and this feeling of dread sunk into our bones. I have never been more afraid in my life. What was funny was at first we thought it was a man, but it must have been huge as the ground itself shook. It was pitch black and we had lights on around us so we couldn't see much beyond our area. Whatever it was charged last us at full speed and we heard a huge crash into the river beside our site. We ran and hid in the car and assumed it was a bear. Even now when we talk about it we still are not completely sure as nothing could begin to describe the feeling of terror we each felt just before we heard the footsteps. To this day it was the scariest thing that ever happened to me. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I loved to night hike alone before I was married and loved to go to this certain remote area where I live after crazy work days. It is about a 3-mile walk. Multiple times, over the course of a year-ish, I would hear what I thought were whispers, only while sitting at this overlook. Here on this spot, on clear nights with the moon out, you could see so many mountains and trees. And nothing man-made as far as you can see. It was my favorite place to go. It was beautiful. I almost never used my flashlights, because once your eyes acclimate to the moonlight, you can see better without them. Anyway, I would try not to let my mind wander whenever I would think that I was hearing something out of the ordinary, like this whispering. I always kept my mind solid, and thinking of relaxing subjects and so on. There were 2 especially memorable nights out of the bunch. It was into autumn, the leaves were falling in full force. I was almost to my favorite spot, it must have been around 11 p.m. I was walking uphill towards the overlook, when I heard leaves crunching. It sounded near, but I couldn't estimate which direction. There are these huge boulders nearby, and as I passed them, I heard small rocks crumbling from them. Again, it was indistinct, very strange sounding. Metallic sounding. Hard to describe. Immediately gave me the shivers. Something strange is happening, I thought. I should leave now. I had my flashlight on at this point, ignoring my normal no light rule. It's a 1000 lumen beast of a light. I'm heading back, and just in the periphery cone of the light, I see a shadowy blip. Like a dark hazy / smoky moving shadow. Caught like 5 seconds of it and it was gone. It didn't leave away from me, the haze was there, then went transparent, then disappeared. I remembered just when I was telling myself that it was nothing, I heard leaves crunching in the same direction, moving irregularly. Fast, fast, slow, fast, slow, slow, something like that. About 15 feet to my left. I ran about half-mile to the junction, before collecting myself and nervously listening behind me all the way to the car. The second time was with my future wife, in the same area of the overlook. It was the last time I went night hiking. About 2 years later. Everything was cool the whole night, except right before we were getting up to walk back to the car. I thought I heard those whispers again, but was not sure. I didn't say anything to her, because I didn't want to scare her for no reason. My imagination, right? She stopped talking to me as she abruptly stopped walking. Shh, do you hear that? What? I replied, getting goosebumps. I heard something, almost like muffled talking. Like there's a conversation nearby. My heart rate was elevating. We are 3 miles from the trailhead on protected forest land. Only the stars and moonlight visible. She grasped my hand tightly. We walked about 10 yards when she squeals like I have never heard her before. She starts running, pulling me along, swearing. We keep running, our lights on now. We stop after some time, she has tears in her eyes. I ask what is wrong. I heard it very faintly. I heard my name. Cue the holy shit. My friends and I went camping for my 18th birthday at a fairly remote spot in the Catskills. It was late at night on the first night, and after some revelry, celebrating my b-day, we decided to turn in for the night. There were 3 of us, and we were all in the same tent. About 20 minutes after we got settled into to go to sleep, we hear a woman let out the most blood-curdling scream I've ever heard in my life. This was over a decade ago and I can still hear it in my head. We all froze. I had only ever been camping at a campground before, and as far as we knew, there were no other campers nearby. The woman started screaming "help me" and sounded like something horrible was happening. We eventually managed to unfreeze and grab whatever blunt objects or knives we had inside the tent and all held them close to our chests, still laying down but afraid to breathe. It sounded like she was being eaten by a bear. It only lasted a few seconds, but I have never been so paralyzed by fright in my life. None of us slept that night. We were certain that every noise, leaf crunch, or blow of the wind was either a bear or a murderer coming for us next. At one point, one of us worked up the courage to open the tent and point a flashlight in the direction of the screams. There was nothing there and no signs of people or bears. When the sun finally came up, we got out of the tent to see what might have happened. It turns out, there was a small group of people camping not far from us. A couple had walked off towards our camp, had an argument, and the guy ran away from his GF, leaving her in the woods with no flashlight. We all felt stupid and disappointed in ourselves for not having enough bravery to help someone who was screaming for help. Although the entire situation wound up being stupid, it changed something inside of all 3 of us. Nothing scares me anymore. Either that, or the time I was sleeping in my hammock and our camp was surrounded by coyotes. The noise they make as a group is not something you want to hear when you have no protection. That was another sleepless night. A few years ago we had a big church camping trip. It was on one of those 100 people campsites you need to reserve a year in advance that's pretty isolated out. Anyways, I'm up pretty late chatting before finally calling it a night. It was around 1 a.m. and only 3 other people were still up, my friend and 2 older gentlemen who were still talking away. I go to my tent and fall asleep almost instantly. Anyways, I wake up in the morning and here's the story I hear. Apparently about 15 minutes after I fell asleep, my friend heard screams that sounded like help. Everyone else quieted down and they too heard what sounded like distant yelling, although they couldn't make out what. They took a light and made a quick 5-minute walk in the direction of the sound, but nothing. My friend swears it sounded like someone screaming help. It's possible, but I don't know how likely. The main road was about 20 minutes away, and the only way to our campsite was a single road. There was no reason to be anywhere near our site unless you were camping there. No attractions, rivers, etc. Even for hunting you would be better off going deeper and further out. The next night we stood up again, but this time nothing. I and a couple of friends were backpacking on an easy route in southern Ural Mountains, Russia. It's quite popular route, but since it was Monday, we were completely alone there. We were going to hike to the waterfall, which was about 10 kilometers from the drawpoint, train station, but decided to set camp about 1/3 of the way, on a river island, and hike light to that waterfall the next day. So here we were, on an island in a quite shallow river with lots of fords here and there. The day went in setting camp, gathering firewood, cooking, swimming and having fun, but closer to the evening, in the twilight, this huge lightning storm rolls over us. The sky got really dark, rain pouring from above and lightning bolts hitting mountain tops, like 2 to 3 kilometers away from us. So we hurried to our tent, started playing cards and chatting, and after a while we hear something that's different from the constant sounds of raindrops hitting tent roof or the rumbling of river in shallow places. It sounded like someone was moving in the water near the island shore. We opened our tent, but couldn't see anything. It was almost completely dark out there. We thought that maybe it was some horse or a cow, since there was a village about 10 kilometers away and the cattle occasionally wandered to that place, grazing. We've seen cattle footprints in the mud on the opposite riverbank. But the sounds were as if that creature or something had 2 legs, not 4. So it was likely a human, but what would a human do that far from a village, in twilight time, and under a heavy rain? We've closed our tent and sat in silence as these footsteps were unmistakably heading to our tent. Once they stopped, like 3 to 4 meters away, we opened our tent door once again, and, I shit you not, the lightning goes off the same moment, and in that brief flash of light we see a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a raincoat with a hood, swamp boots and with an axe in his hand. That picture is forever imprinted in my brain, I think. So, after a couple moments that seemed like an eternity, this figure speaks, "Guys, don't leave your axe out in the rain like that," and asks if we have vodka. Turns out he was a local fisherman. He got caught in the storm and soaked wet, and just wanted to get warm, and vodka, apparently. So it happened that we had half a bottle of vodka that we found on one of the other campsites and took it with us in case we needed to disinfect something. I must say that it's not your everyday Russian hiking experience to find a vodka bottle on an empty campsite. Despite stereotypes, we were as surprised as you are. We traded that vodka for a big loose, which we fried in the kettle's lid later that evening, and it was one of the tastiest fish dishes I've ever tasted in my life. Happy end. Went on a survival weekend in the mountains with the scouts. We had all built bivouac shelters in a forest about 2 miles away from a cabin our leaders were staying in. About 10 p.m. our leaders made their departure to their cabin for the night under strict instructions we were not to leave the bivouac area unless it was an emergency. About 2 hours or so later a few of us decided to sneak away and go exploring in the direction of the cabin, which was situated in a small clearing within the forest on a slight hill. We got to the edge of the clearing and about 20 feet away from us was the cabin. We could see through the windows into the kitchen where our leaders were sat around a table playing cards. One of them stood up and walked to the kitchen sink. A few seconds later we heard the flow of water near us. We moved a few feet and found a pipe with water flowing out of it which came from the kitchen sink. My friend cupped his hands around the end of the pipe and started whispering ace of spades. Who has the ace of spades? The leaders in the kitchen started looking at each other horrified. You must leave this place now. They were all stood up and looked like they were arguing with each other to own up to which one of them was making the whispering noises. My friend continued with the whispers. Now you have stood up, leave this place. You are not welcome. The leaders were freaking out and looking all around the kitchen. The rest of us picked up some small stones and sneaked closer to the cabin and started to throw them at the windows and onto the roof of the kitchen. We rolled our way back down the hill to the edge of the forest and ran back to our bivouac site. Shortly after we got back to the site, our leaders arrived on scene looking very shaken and disheveled.